The fire cracked and screamed as it rose higher than any normal flame should rise. Roran Vale gripped the stone altar with both hands, his knuckles turning white, as the old seer's voice rose into a chant that shook the very air around them. Elira Norden stood a few steps behind him, clutching her healer's bag, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. She had begged Roran not to trust a seer nobody in the pack had ever heard of before, but the Alpha King was desperate. The curse on his bloodline had already taken his father and his uncle before their time, and with his coronation only weeks away, he could not risk carrying that same shadow into his reign. The seer, an old woman named Yarrow, with cloudy eyes and trembling hands, raised a carved bone staff above the fire. She spoke words in a language that sounded older than the mountains around them. Elira felt the ground tremble beneath her boots. She reached out instinctively to steady herself against a nearby rock, but before her fingers touched stone, a wave of white light exploded from the fire and swallowed the entire clearing. Elira screamed, or she thought she screamed. The sound that came out of her throat was not her own voice. It was deep, rough, and commanding, a voice she had heard shout orders across a training field 100 times before. She opened her eyes and found herself staring down at her own hands, except they were not her hands anymore. They were larger, stronger, marked with old training scars she recognized instantly. She was looking at Roran's hands. She was inside Roran's body. A few feet away, someone else screamed too, and this time, the voice was soft, high, and frightened, a voice that belonged to Elira. Roran stumbled backward, clutching his own throat in confusion, staring down at slender fingers and a healer's satchel hanging from his shoulder. He looked up, eyes wide with panic, and found himself staring directly into his own face. His own body was standing across the clearing from him, looking equally horrified. "What?" Elira said, except it came out in Roran's low, commanding tone. "Did you do?" The old seer stumbled back from the fire, her staff slipping from her fingers and clattering against the stone altar. Her cloudy eyes went wide with something between shock and horror. "The rune," she whispered. "I read the rune wrong. This was never meant to swap two souls. It was meant to lift a curse from one body, not exchange two." Roran, trapped in Elira's smaller frame, tried to take a step forward and nearly fell. His balance was completely wrong. He was not used to this body's weight, its shorter legs, its lighter build. He caught himself against a tree trunk, breathing hard, feeling his heart, no, Elira's heart, hammering inside a chest that did not belong to him. "Fix it," Roran said, his voice trembling in a way it never had before. "Fix it right now." The old seer shook her head slowly, and that small motion sent a cold spike of fear through both of them. "I cannot," she said. "Not tonight. The magic that caused this can only be reversed under the same conditions that created it, when the full moon returns and the stars align as they did tonight. That will not happen again for many weeks." Elira, standing in Roran's body, felt anger rise up hot and fast. She had always been the calm one, the healer who kept her composure, even when blood covered her hands and screams filled her hut. But now, wearing the Alpha King's body, she felt fury coursing through her like fire, an emotion that did not feel entirely her own. She wondered, with a shiver, whether some of Roran's instincts had come along with his body. "Weeks," Roran repeated, horrified. "I have a coronation in 3 weeks. I have a pack that needs an alpha. I cannot stand in front of my council looking like this. And I cannot stand in front of your council looking like you," Elira snapped back, surprising herself with how commanding her borrowed voice sounded. "I am a healer. I bandage wounds. I do not command warriors or negotiate with rival packs." The old seer wrung her hands together, looking between the two of them with growing dread. "There is something else you both must understand," she said quietly. "This swap is fragile. It can be corrected at the next full moon, but only if both of you remain alive and well until then. Should either of you suffer a mortal wound while wearing the other's body, the swap becomes permanent, forever." The clearing fell silent, except for the crackle of the dying fire. Roran looked down at Elira's hands, hands that had healed hundreds of pack members, hands that now felt foreign and fragile in his grip. Elira looked at her own reflection in a puddle near the altar, except the face staring back was Roran's, strong-jawed and golden-eyed, radiating an authority she had never possessed. "We cannot tell anyone," Roran said finally, forcing his borrowed voice into something steadier. If the pack learns their alpha has lost control of his own body, rivals will see it as weakness. They will move against us before the moon even changes. Elira's stomach twisted with dread, though the sensation felt strange running through a body that was not hers. You want me to pretend to be you, she said slowly, in front of your council, your warriors, your betrothed. Roran's borrowed face, Elira's actual face, went pale. He had not even thought of Lady Sable yet, the noblewoman he was set to marry before his coronation. If she noticed anything different about him, about the way he moved or spoke, she would ask questions neither of them could safely answer. And you, Roran said, looking directly into his own golden eyes now staring back at him from Elira's borrowed body, will need to pretend to be me, which means acting like an alpha, which means commanding wolves who have followed me since birth. Elira let out a shaky breath. She had spent years in the shadows of pack life, tending to injuries and mixing remedies, while warriors and nobles debated politics in rooms she was never invited into. The idea of walking into that same room wearing the face of the Alpha King himself made her knees weak, though technically those knees now belonged to Roran, and they felt sturdier than her own ever had. This is madness, she whispered. It is the only option we have, Roran said, and for the first time, something like desperation crept into his tone, a vulnerability Elira had never heard from him before. Perhaps it was because his voice now came from her own softer throat, stripped of the natural authority his real voice always carried. Whatever the reason, it struck her differently than she expected. She realized, watching him struggle to steady himself in her small frame, that she was seeing a side of the Alpha King that his own pack never saw. Uncertainty, fear. A man realizing, perhaps for the first time, how it felt to be physically small in a world built for the strong. The old seer gathered her staff from the ground, her hands still shaking. I am deeply sorry, she said. I will study the old texts every day until the full moon returns. I will find a way to reverse this sooner if one exists. Until then, you must both survive in the bodies you now wear. Trust each other. It is the only way either of you gets your true self back. Roran straightened, or tried to, though Elira's shorter frame made the gesture look almost comical against his usual commanding presence. We leave tonight, he said, before dawn. No one can see us return to the pack grounds together looking like this. Elira nodded, though her mind spun with 1,000 terrifying questions. How was she supposed to walk like an alpha, speak like an alpha, command respect from wolves twice her size when she had spent her entire life being invisible among them? And what would happen to Roran, forced into her healer's hut, expected to identify herbs and treat wounds he knew nothing about? They started back toward the pack grounds in silence, moving carefully through the dark forest, each unfamiliar with the body they now controlled. Roran nearly tripped twice over roots he would normally have leapt across without thought. Elira, wearing Roran's larger frame, found herself instinctively scanning the tree line, the way a trained alpha would, noticing details she had never paid attention to before. The snap of a twig in the distance, the faint scent of another wolf pack marking territory nearby. It unsettled her how naturally those instincts seemed to surface, as though some part of Roran's mind still lingered inside the body she now wore. As they approached the outer wall of Blackthorn territory, torches flickering along the ramparts, Roran stopped suddenly and grabbed Elira's arm, or rather, his own arm now attached to her borrowed body. Wait, he said. Before we go in, we need rules. If we are going to survive this, we cannot slip up even once. Elira turned to face him, still adjusting to seeing her own gentle face carrying such firm authority. What kind of rules? First, we speak only to each other about anything that might expose the truth. Never near guards, never near council members, never near, he hesitated, Lady Sable. Elira nodded slowly. Second, you must learn quickly how an alpha carries himself. Warriors will notice hesitation. They will notice softness where there should be command. I will try to guide you as much as I can without drawing suspicion. And I will need to teach you enough about healing that you do not poison someone by accident, Elira said, a faint edge of dry humor slipping into her tone despite the fear pressing on her chest. For the briefest moment, something like a smile ghosted across Roran's borrowed face, Elira's actual face, and it startled her how strange it felt to see her own features carrying his personality instead of hers. Third, Roran said, his voice dropping lower, more serious. We tell absolutely no one. Not until the moon returns and Yarrow finds a way to reverse this. If word spreads that the Alpha King's soul has been swapped into a healer's body, it will not just be embarrassing. It could be used against the entire pack. Rivals are already circling, waiting for any sign of weakness before my coronation. Elira swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a heavy cloak. She thought of Cade Ashgrove, the neighboring Alpha who had made no secret of his ambitions toward Blackthorn territory. If Cade or his spies ever discovered the truth, it would mean disaster for everyone she had grown up protecting with her healing hands. Agreed, she said quietly. No one finds out, not until we are ourselves again. They stood there for a long moment in the darkness outside the pack walls, two people trapped in each other's skin, staring at a version of themselves they barely recognized. Then, without another word, they turned and walked together toward the gates, toward a life neither of them was prepared to live, each one desperately hoping they could hold the lie together long enough to survive until the next full moon rose. Behind them, deep in the forest, the Seer's fire finally burned itself out, leaving nothing but smoke curling upward into the cold night sky, carrying with it the secret that would soon shake the entire Blackthorn pack to its very foundation. As they crossed beneath the looming stone archway leading into pack territory, a guard on night watch straightened immediately at the sight of the Alpha King's familiar silhouette, bowing his head in respect. Elira, wearing that silhouette now, felt her stomach drop into her borrowed boots. She managed a stiff nod in return, praying it looked natural enough, while beside her, Roran, disguised as the healer, kept his head low and his pace steady, the way Elira always walked through the grounds, quiet and unnoticed. Neither of them spoke again until they reached the healer's hut, where they would have to separate for the first time since the swap, each one walking toward a life that no longer matched the body they wore. Elira turned to look at Roran one last time before parting ways. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said softly, though her voice still carried Roran's low, commanding tone, "we cannot fail. Too many people are depending on both of us, whether they know it or not." Roran nodded, his borrowed face, Elira's actual face, set with quiet determination, despite the fear still lingering behind his eyes. "Then we survive this together," he said, "whatever it takes." With that, they parted, each stepping into a life that was no longer their own, unaware of just how difficult the days ahead would truly become, or how much this strange and terrifying swap was about to change everything they once believed about each other, about strength, about weakness, and about the true weight the other person carried every single day. Morning light spilled through the small window of the healer's hut, and Roran woke with a start, his heart racing before he even remembered why. For a moment, lying still under a rough wool blanket, he forgot everything that had happened the night before. Then he lifted his hand to rub his eyes, and saw slender fingers, unfamiliar and small, and the memory crashed back over him like cold water. He was still trapped inside Elira's body. This was not a nightmare he could wake up from. He sat up slowly, testing the unfamiliar weight of this frame. Everything felt wrong. His shoulders were narrower, his legs seemed too short when he swung them over the edge of the cot. Even his breathing felt different, quicker, lighter, lacking the deep, steady rhythm he had known his entire life. He stood, and immediately the room tilted sideways. He grabbed the wooden bedpost just in time to stop himself from falling face first onto the floor. A soft knock at the door startled him. Before he could answer, an elderly pack member named Mira pushed the door open, carrying a basket of herbs. "Elira, dear, I brought the yarrow root you asked for," she said cheerfully, then paused, studying his face with narrowed eyes. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." Roran forced what he hoped was a normal smile onto Elira's face. "Just tired," he said, and immediately winced internally at how strange her voice sounded coming out of his own mouth, soft and light instead of deep and commanding. Mira did not seem to notice anything unusual, simply nodding and setting the basket down on a nearby table before shuffling back out the door. Alone again, Roran exhaled shakily and looked around the small hut. Shelves lined every wall, crowded with clay jars, dried leaves, tied bundles of unfamiliar plants, and small carved bowls filled with powders in every shade of brown and green. He had walked past this hut 1,000 times in his life, without ever once wondering what happened inside it. Now he was expected to know every single item on these shelves by heart, and people's lives depended on him getting it right. Meanwhile, Across the pack grounds, Illyra woke inside Roran's private chambers, and the shock hit her just as hard. The bed alone was larger than her entire hut back home, carved from dark oak with thick furs draped across it. She sat up and immediately felt the difference in her own strength, muscles she had never possessed responding to her thoughts with startling power. She flexed Roran's hand and watched, fascinated and terrified, as the fingers moved with a kind of raw strength she had never known. A firm knock came at the door. "Alpha," a deep voice called from outside. "The council awaits your presence in the main hall. They say it is urgent." Illyra's stomach dropped straight through the floor. She had known this moment was coming, but somehow knowing it and facing it were two very different things. She forced herself to stand, and instantly felt how naturally this body wanted to move, powerful and sure, as though some instinct buried deep in Roran's muscles guided her steps even without her full understanding. She dressed quickly in the clothes laid out for her, heavy dark fabric embroidered with the blackthorn crest, and stepped out into the hallway, where a young guard named Callum bowed his head respectfully. "Good morning, Alpha. The council members have been waiting nearly 20 minutes. Illyra nodded, trying to imitate the calm authority she had seen Roran display countless times over the years, while she stood quietly in the background bandaging wounded warriors after training accidents. "Lead the way," she said, and was startled by how naturally commanding her borrowed voice sounded. The council hall was massive, with a long table surrounded by pack elders and senior warriors, each one turning to look at her the moment she entered. She recognized most of their faces from years of treating their injuries, though none of them had ever looked at her directly before. Now every eye in the room focused entirely on her, waiting for the Alpha King to speak. "Alpha," said an older man named Garrick, the head of the Warrior Council. "We must discuss the border dispute with Ashgrove territory. Their scouts were spotted crossing into our eastern woods 3 times this past week." Illyra's mind raced. She knew nothing about border disputes or territorial politics. Her entire life had revolved around herbs, wounds, and quiet conversations with frightened patients. She glanced around the table, searching for any clue about how to respond, and finally settled on the only strategy she could think of. "Tell me your assessment first," she said carefully, trying to sound thoughtful rather than clueless. "I want to hear your read on the situation before I decide our response." Garrick seemed slightly surprised by the question, since apparently the real Roran usually spoke first and decisively, but he nodded and began explaining the situation in detail. Illyra listened intently, absorbing every word, grateful for the extra minutes it bought her to think. By the time he finished, she had gathered enough information to offer a response that sounded reasonably measured. "Increase patrols along the eastern border," she said, "but do not engage unless directly provoked. I do not want to give Ashgrove any excuse to escalate before the coronation." Several council members nodded approvingly, and Illyra felt a small wave of relief wash over her. Perhaps this would not be as impossible as she feared. Perhaps she could survive this after all, one careful sentence at a time. Meanwhile, back at the healer's hut, Roran faced his first true test. A young warrior named Fen stumbled through the door, clutching his forearm, blood seeping between his fingers from a deep gash he had suffered during training. He looked at Roran with pained but trusting eyes. "Illyra," Fen said through gritted teeth, "it will not stop bleeding." Roran froze completely. He had watched Illyra treat wounds countless times over the years, without ever paying real attention, assuming it would never matter to him personally. Now, faced with an actual injury, and an actual person in pain, his mind went completely blank. "Sit," he said, buying himself time, guiding Fen onto a wooden stool. He glanced desperately at the shelves lining the walls, searching for anything that looked familiar. He remembered Illyra once mentioning something about cleaning wounds before treating them, so he grabbed a jar of what he hoped was clean water and poured it carefully over the gash, wincing as Fen hissed in pain. "Easy," Roran murmured, trying to sound reassuring, despite his racing heart. He spotted a small bundle of dried leaves tied with string, labeled in handwriting he assumed belonged to Illyra, though he could not read the tiny scrawled letters clearly enough to identify what plant it actually was. He grabbed it anyway, crushed a few leaves between his fingers the way he vaguely remembered seeing Illyra do once, and pressed the mixture gently against the wound. To his immense relief, the bleeding began to slow almost immediately. Fen let out a shaky breath, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "Thank you," he said. You always know exactly what to do. Roran managed a weak smile, hiding his overwhelming relief. He had gotten lucky, nothing more, and he knew it. If he had grabbed the wrong bundle, if his guess had been even slightly off, the consequences could have been disastrous. He needed real knowledge, not luck, and he needed it quickly. That evening, after the council meeting finally ended, Elira made her way carefully through the pack grounds, toward the healer's hut, moving slowly to avoid drawing attention to how unfamiliar this powerful body still felt beneath her. She found Roran sitting exhausted on the small cot, staring blankly at the shelves of herbs surrounding him. How was it? She asked quietly, closing the door behind her. I nearly killed someone with a plant I could not identify, Roran admitted, running a hand through hair that was not his own. How was the council? I survived, Elira said, sinking down onto a wooden stool across from him. Barely. I let them talk first, so I would not have to reveal how little I understood. Roran managed a tired laugh, the sound strange coming from Elira's softer voice. Clever, he said. I wish I had thought of something that clever with Fenn's wound. You need to learn the herbs, Elira said firmly. Tonight. I will teach you everything I can before tomorrow, starting with the basics that could actually save someone's life. Roran nodded gratefully, and for the next several hours, Elira walked him carefully through jar after jar, explaining which herbs stopped bleeding, which reduced fever, which could be dangerous if used incorrectly. Roran listened with a focus he rarely gave anything outside of warrior training, memorizing every detail, as though his life depended on it, because in some strange way, it truly did. You are a good teacher, he admitted quietly, somewhere near midnight, as exhaustion finally began pulling at both of them. Elira paused, surprised by the genuine warmth in his tone. You are a better student than I expected, she replied honestly. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people trapped in bodies that were not their own, slowly discovering that surviving this strange nightmare together might require more than just careful lies and clever excuses. It might require them to actually trust each other, perhaps for the very first time. Tomorrow will be harder, Roran said eventually, standing to leave for the night. Lady Sable requested a private audience with me, with you, tomorrow afternoon. Elira's stomach tightened with dread. She had nearly forgotten about Roran's betrothed entirely. What does she want to discuss? Wedding preparations, Roran said grimly, among other things. Elira closed her eyes briefly, already dreading the encounter. Then you had better teach me everything you can about how you normally speak to her, she said. Because I have absolutely no idea how to convince Lady Sable that I am the man she intends to marry. Roran hesitated at the doorway, glancing back at her with an expression she could not quite read. Just be honest with her, as much as you safely can, he said quietly. She deserves that much, even if she cannot know the whole truth. With that, he slipped out into the night, leaving Elira alone with her racing thoughts and the growing realization that tomorrow would test this fragile disguise in ways neither of them had fully prepared for. The private garden behind the main hall was quiet in the early afternoon, filled with the soft hum of bees moving between rows of blooming flowers. Elira stood near the stone fountain, wearing Roran's tall frame, feeling more nervous than she had felt during the entire council meeting the day before. Lady Sable was due to arrive any moment, and Elira had no idea how to convincingly play the role of a devoted betrothed. She had spent the morning peppering Roran with questions, trying to memorize small details about his relationship with Sable, how they typically greeted each other, what topics they usually discussed, anything that might help her avoid an obvious mistake. Roran had answered as best he could, though even he seemed to struggle explaining the nuances of a relationship built more on political arrangement than genuine closeness. Footsteps approached along the garden path, and Elira looked up to see Lady Sable walking gracefully toward her, dressed in deep green silk, her dark hair braided elegantly over one shoulder. She was strikingly beautiful, with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. Roran, Sable said warmly, though something guarded lingered behind her smile. You look different today. Tired, perhaps. Elira's heart pounded, but she forced Roran's usual calm expression onto her borrowed face. Council matters kept me up later than expected, she said, trying to match the deep, measured tone Roran normally used. Sable studied her for a long moment, tilting her head slightly. You seem softer somehow. I cannot quite explain it. She stepped closer, reaching out to touch Alira's arm, a gesture that clearly meant something significant between them. Alira froze, unsure how to respond without either seeming cold or overly affectionate. I have been thinking about the coronation, Alira said quickly, steering the conversation toward safer territory. And our wedding, of course. I want to make certain everything proceeds exactly as it should. This seemed to please Sable, who smiled more genuinely and began discussing wedding preparations with obvious enthusiasm, talking about flower arrangements, guest lists from allied packs, and the ceremonial robes being prepared by the finest tailors in the region. Alira nodded along, offering brief, agreeable responses whenever necessary, grateful that Sable seemed content to carry most of the conversation herself. But then Sable paused, her expression shifting into something more serious. Roran, I must ask you something honestly. Have your feelings changed at all toward our arrangement? Alira's mind raced. She had no idea what feelings actually existed between Roran and Sable, whether their engagement was built on genuine affection or purely political convenience. She chose her next words carefully. My duty to this pack has never changed, she said, hoping the answer sounded appropriately diplomatic, without revealing her complete uncertainty. Sable's eyes narrowed slightly, clearly noticing the evasiveness in that response. That is not quite what I asked. Alira swallowed hard, feeling the conversation slipping into dangerous territory. Before she could formulate a better answer, a commotion near the garden entrance interrupted them. A messenger came rushing forward, breathless and pale. Alpha, he said urgently, bowing quickly. Warriors from Ashgrove territory have been spotted much closer to our borders than before. Garrick believes it may be scouts preparing for something larger. Alira felt a flood of relief at the interruption, though the news itself was troubling. I will address it immediately, she said, using the distraction as an excuse to step away from Sable's probing questions. Forgive me. We will continue this conversation another time. Sable's expression remained suspicious as Alira hurried away, but there was nothing more Alira could do in that moment, except escape, before making a mistake that might expose everything. Meanwhile, at the healer's hut, Roran faced his own unexpected challenge. An elderly pack member named Old Bram arrived complaining of chest pains, his breathing labored and shallow. Roran's borrowed knowledge from the previous night's lessons flooded his mind, but nothing Alira had taught him covered a situation this serious. Sit down slowly, Roran instructed, guiding Bram onto the cot, trying to appear calm, despite his racing thoughts. He checked Bram's pulse the way Alira had shown him, counting silently, noting how irregular and weak it felt beneath his fingers. Is it my heart? Bram asked, fear evident in his voice. Roran hesitated, unwilling to guess wrong on something this serious. I need to examine you more carefully, he said, buying time while desperately trying to remember anything relevant from his lessons. He recalled Alira mentioning a particular tea, made from hawthorn berries, that helped calm heart troubles, and he quickly moved toward the shelf, where he remembered seeing dried berries stored in a clay jar. He prepared the tea as carefully as he could remember, steeping the berries in hot water for several long minutes while Bram breathed shakily beside him. When the tea was ready, Roran helped Bram drink it slowly, watching anxiously for any sign of improvement. Gradually, over the following 20 minutes, Bram's breathing began to steady, his color returning slightly. Better, he murmured. Thank you, Alira. You always seem to know exactly what will help. Roran exhaled slowly, relief flooding through him. He had guessed correctly again, though the stakes had been far higher than the previous day's incident with Fen. He was beginning to realize just how much genuine skill and quick thinking Alira's daily work required, skills he had never once considered valuable until he was forced to rely on them himself. Later that evening, Roran and Alira met privately again in the small hut, both exhausted from their separate ordeals throughout the day. Alira recounted her tense conversation with Lady Sable, admitting how close she had come to revealing something suspicious. She noticed something different about me, Alira said worriedly. About you, I mean. She said I seemed softer somehow. Roran frowned, clearly troubled by this development. Sable has always been perceptive. If she suspects something is wrong, she will not simply let it go. What do we do? Alira asked. Roran considered the question carefully. For now, we avoid unnecessary time alone with her, whenever possible. I will need to think of some way to reassure her, without revealing the truth. Illyra nodded, though worry still lingered in her borrowed expression. She then told him about old Bram's heart troubles and how she had guessed correctly with the hawthorn tea, though the fear of guessing wrong still weighed heavily on her mind. "You did well," Roran said, genuine admiration coloring his tone. "Better than I would have managed, I think, without your teaching." "We were both fortunate today," Illyra admitted, "but fortune will not protect us forever. We need to prepare more carefully for whatever comes next." As if summoned by her words, a sharp knock interrupted them. Garrick stood at the door, his expression grim. "Alpha," he said, addressing Illyra directly, unaware of the truth behind her borrowed face. "We have confirmed reports that Ashgrove forces are massing near the eastern border. Cade Ashgrove himself has been seen among them." Illyra's heart sank as she absorbed this new threat. Whatever fragile peace they had hoped to maintain until the full moon's return was quickly slipping away, and now, on top of everything else, they would need to navigate the looming possibility of open conflict between two powerful packs, all while trapped inside bodies that were not their own. "Thank you, Garrick," Illyra said, forcing steadiness into her borrowed voice. "Increase our eastern patrols immediately, and inform me the moment anything changes." Garrick nodded and departed swiftly, leaving Roran and Illyra alone once more, the weight of this new danger settling heavily over both of them. They exchanged a worried glance, silently acknowledging that surviving this ordeal was about to become far more complicated than either of them had originally feared. 3 days had passed since the swap, and Illyra found herself growing more comfortable, though never fully at ease, inside the powerful frame of the Alpha King. She had learned to walk with more confidence, to let her borrowed shoulders sit back and steady the way Roran's naturally did, and to modulate her voice into something closer to his usual commanding tone. Still, every council meeting brought fresh terror, and today's gathering promised to be the most difficult yet. The eastern border situation had escalated overnight. Scouts reported that Cade Ashgrove had moved nearly 24 warriors closer to Blackthorn territory, positioned just beyond the tree line in a clear show of intimidation. The council hall buzzed with tense conversation as Illyra entered, every face turning toward her, waiting for the Alpha's decisive leadership. "Alpha," Garrick said immediately, "we must decide our response. Ashgrove grows bolder each day. If we do nothing, he will interpret our silence as weakness." Illyra's mind raced, searching desperately for the right words. She had spent every spare moment over the past few days trying to absorb everything Roran could teach her about pack politics and warrior strategy, but real experience could not be replicated overnight. She glanced around the table, buying herself precious seconds to think. "What does our scouting report suggest about their true intentions?" she asked, deflecting the question while gathering more information, a tactic that had served her well during the previous meeting. A younger council member named Torin cleared his throat. "Our trackers believe this may simply be posturing ahead of your coronation, Alpha. Cade wishes to remind everyone of his strength before you formally claim the title of High King." Illyra absorbed this information carefully. If this truly was posturing, rather than genuine preparation for conflict, then an aggressive response might actually provoke the very violence they hoped to avoid. She thought of every quiet conversation she had overheard while tending wounds over the years. Warriors complaining about reckless decisions made by impulsive leaders, and healers cleaning up the consequences afterward. "We will not move first," Illyra said finally, her borrowed voice steady despite her racing heart. "Increase our patrols along the border, and ensure every warrior remains alert. But we will not provoke conflict before the coronation. Let Cade posture all he wishes. We will not give him the satisfaction of an overreaction." Silence followed her words, and for a terrifying moment, Illyra feared she had made a serious misstep. Then Garrick nodded slowly, a look of genuine respect crossing his weathered features. "A measured response," he said. "Wise, Alpha. Perhaps wiser than I expected." Illyra felt a rush of relief mixed with surprised pride. She had made a real decision, one that genuinely seemed to satisfy the council, using nothing but careful reasoning and the quiet lessons she had absorbed over years of watching pack life unfold from the shadows. The meeting continued for another hour, covering supply concerns and coronation preparations, and Illyra found herself growing gradually more confident with each passing exchange. She began to understand that leadership was not always about instinctive command. Sometimes it was simply about listening carefully and making thoughtful decisions under pressure. something her years as a healer had actually prepared her for, more than she initially realized. As the council meeting ended and members began filing out, Garrick lingered behind, studying her with a curious expression. "Alpha, may I speak candidly?" Alira nodded cautiously. "Of course." "You have seemed different these past few days," Garrick said carefully. "More deliberate, more thoughtful perhaps, than your usual decisive nature. I do not say this as criticism. In truth, I find myself impressed by this new approach." Alira's heart pounded, unsure how to respond without raising further suspicion. "Recent events have given me much to consider," she said carefully, which was, in its own strange way, entirely true. Garrick nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation, and departed without further questions. Alira exhaled shakily once she was finally alone, grateful to have survived another close call. Later that afternoon, a training accident brought unexpected chaos to the warrior grounds. Two young wolves, testing their strength against each other in mock combat, misjudged their movements, and collided hard enough that one, a young man named Perrin, was thrown several feet and landed awkwardly on his shoulder. Warriors rushed him immediately toward the healer's hut, shouting for Alira, unaware that Roran now occupied that role. Roran heard the commotion before he saw them, and rushed to the door, his heart sinking as he saw Perrin's arm hanging at an unnatural angle. This was clearly beyond anything covered by his hurried lessons from Alira over the past few nights. "Set him down carefully," Roran instructed, trying to project confidence he did not entirely feel. He examined the injury as best he could, recognizing that the shoulder had been dislocated from its socket, a type of injury he vaguely remembered hearing warriors discuss casually over the years, though he had never once considered how to properly treat it. "This is going to hurt," Roran warned Perrin honestly, "but I need to put it back into place." Perrin nodded through gritted teeth, bracing himself. Roran positioned his hands carefully, recalling snippets of conversation from years past, warriors joking about how healers manipulated joints back into place, using firm, controlled pressure. He took a steadying breath and applied gentle but deliberate force, feeling the joint shift back into position with an audible pop. Perrin let out a sharp cry, followed immediately by a relieved gasp, as the pain shifted from sharp and unbearable to a dull, manageable throb. "Better," he breathed. "Much better. Thank you, Alira." Roran allowed himself a small, exhausted smile, quickly preparing a sling from clean cloth to stabilize the shoulder while it healed. As the other warriors helped Perrin back toward his quarters, Roran sank down onto his stool, hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the entire ordeal. That evening, Roran and Alira met again, both exhausted but carrying a growing sense of cautious accomplishment. Alira recounted her success navigating the council meeting, and Roran shared the story of Perrin's shoulder, both of them somewhat amazed at how much they were managing to survive through careful thinking and borrowed instinct. "I think," Alira said slowly, "we might actually manage this, somehow." Roran studied her borrowed face for a long moment, something thoughtful crossing his expression. "I never realized," he said quietly, "how much skill your work actually requires. I always assumed healing was simple, following basic instructions passed down through tradition. I was wrong." Alira felt an unexpected warmth at his words, surprised by how much they meant to her. For years, she had quietly accepted her position among the lowest ranks of pack hierarchy, her contributions largely overlooked despite the countless lives she had saved through careful, patient work. Hearing genuine acknowledgement from the Alpha King himself, even one currently trapped inside her own body, touched something deep within her. "And I never realized," she admitted in return, "how much genuine thought goes into leading a pack. I always assumed authority alone was enough. I see now how much careful judgment it truly demands." They sat together quietly for a while, the growing respect between them settling into something unspoken but undeniably present. Outside, the pack grounds settled into evening stillness, unaware of just how much their Alpha King and their quiet healer were beginning to understand about each other, and about themselves. Through this strange and terrifying exchange neither of them had ever wanted, but both were slowly learning to survive. A week into the swap, Roran had begun to develop a strange rhythm within the healer's hut, though every single day still brought fresh challenges he never could have anticipated. This particular morning, an urgent case arrived that tested him more than anything before. A young mother named Wren, carrying her infant daughter, the child's small body burning with fever. her breathing shallow and rapid. "Please," Ren begged, tears streaming down her face. She will not stop crying, and now, she has grown too weak, even for that. Roran's borrowed heart pounded with genuine fear as he took the infant carefully into his arms, feeling the alarming heat radiating from her tiny body. He had never handled a child this young before, and the weight of responsibility pressed down on him harder than any battle he had ever faced as Alpha. He laid the infant gently on the examination table, trying to recall every fragment of knowledge Elira had shared with him over their nightly lessons. Fever, she had told him, often responded well to a particular combination of cooling herbs mixed into a gentle paste, applied to the forehead and wrists, alongside careful hydration. "I need you to help me," Roran told Ren, keeping his voice calm despite his racing thoughts. "Hold her steady while I prepare something to bring the fever down." He moved quickly toward the shelves, searching for the specific herbs Elira had shown him. Chamomile, mixed with a touch of mint, ground into a fine paste with cool water. His hands trembled slightly as he worked, acutely aware that a mistake here could have devastating consequences for this innocent child. Once the paste was ready, he applied it carefully to the infant's forehead and the delicate skin of her wrists, then helped Ren administer small sips of water mixed with a hint of honey to keep her hydrated. They waited together, in tense silence, minutes stretching agonizingly long, until finally the infant's ragged breathing began to ease, her small body relaxing slightly against her mother's chest. "Her fever is breaking," Roran said, relief flooding through him as he checked her temperature again, finding it noticeably cooler than before. Ren wept openly now, though her tears carried gratitude rather than fear. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know what I would have done without you, Elira." After Ren left, cradling her now peacefully sleeping daughter, Roran sank onto his stool, utterly drained by the emotional weight of what had just occurred. He realized, with a clarity that struck him deeply, just how much genuine courage Elira's quiet work demanded, every single day. Facing life and death situations with steady hands and careful knowledge, all while receiving little recognition from the pack hierarchy that so often overlooked her. Meanwhile, Elira faced her own unexpected trial within the council hall. A trade dispute had arisen between two prominent pack families, each accusing the other of dishonest dealings regarding shared hunting territories. Tempers flared as both sides presented their grievances loudly, each demanding the Alpha's immediate judgment in their favor. Elira listened carefully, absorbing every detail of the dispute, recognizing patterns from years of overhearing similar complaints while treating patients in her hut. She had learned, through countless quiet conversations, that most conflicts within the pack stemmed from misunderstanding, rather than genuine malice. "Both families will present their hunting records from the past season," Elira announced firmly, once the shouting finally settled enough for her voice to be heard. "We will review the actual territorial boundaries together, calmly, and determine the truth from evidence rather than accusation." This measured approach seemed to diffuse much of the tension in the room, both families reluctantly agreeing to the proposed process. Over the following hour, Elira guided the discussion carefully, asking pointed questions that gradually revealed the dispute stemmed from an honest misunderstanding about boundary markers that had shifted slightly after a recent storm, rather than any deliberate dishonesty from either side. By the meeting's end, both families departed satisfied with the resolution, their earlier hostility replaced with mutual understanding. Garrick, observing quietly from the corner of the hall, approached Elira afterward with evident admiration. "That was skillfully handled, Alpha," he said. "I have watched you resolve disputes for years, but never quite like that. You allowed both sides to feel heard, rather than simply issuing judgment. It made all the difference." Elira offered a modest nod, though inwardly, she felt a swell of genuine pride. She was beginning to realize that her years of quiet observation, watching pack members interact, understanding their fears and motivations while tending their wounds, had actually prepared her remarkably well for this unexpected role, even if she never could have imagined it before. That evening, as Roran and Elira met once again in their now familiar routine, they shared their respective stories with a growing sense of mutual respect that had steadily deepened over the past week. "An infant's fever," Roran said, still visibly shaken by the morning's events. "I have faced hostile wolves in battle, without feeling half as frightened as I did holding that child." Elira's expression softened, with genuine empathy. "It never becomes easy," she admitted. Every time a child's life hangs in the balance, my own heart nearly stops as well. You handled it well, though. Ren spoke highly of your care when I passed her in the grounds this afternoon. Roran managed a tired smile. I could not have managed it without everything you taught me. I understand now why you never boast about your work. The weight of it would crush anyone seeking recognition, rather than genuinely caring for those you help. Elira felt a warmth spreading through her chest at his words, something she recognized, with quiet surprise, as more than simple gratitude. She found herself studying his borrowed features, her own face carrying his personality now, and wondering when exactly her feelings toward him had begun shifting into something more complicated than mere alliance born of necessity. And your dispute resolution today, Roran continued, unaware of her internal realization. Garrick could not stop praising your judgment when I encountered him near the training grounds. He believes you have grown remarkably wise these past weeks. I simply listened, Elira said modestly, something I learned from years spent quietly observing pack life while tending wounds. Roran studied her carefully for a long moment. Perhaps, he said slowly, leadership was never truly about commanding respect through strength alone. Perhaps it requires the same patience and careful attention that healing demands. Elira met his borrowed gaze, recognizing genuine sincerity behind his words. Perhaps we are both discovering things about each other, and about ourselves, that we never expected to learn. They sat together in comfortable silence as evening settled over the pack grounds outside, both increasingly aware that whatever strange bond had formed between them through this impossible situation was becoming something neither of them had anticipated, nor were entirely certain how to navigate, especially with the full moon and its promised reversal still weeks away, and countless challenges yet to face before then. Lady Sable arrived at the main hall unannounced, her expression carrying a determination that immediately put Elira on edge. 2 weeks had passed since the swap, and Elira had managed to avoid extended private conversations with Sable through careful scheduling and convenient excuses. But today, apparently, that strategy had reached its limit. Roran, Sable said, closing the door behind her with deliberate finality. We need to speak. Truly speak, without interruptions this time. Elira straightened in her chair, bracing herself for whatever difficult conversation was about to unfold. Of course, she said, keeping her borrowed voice as steady as possible. Sable studied her for a long moment, her sharp eyes searching Elira's face with an intensity that made her deeply uncomfortable. You have changed, Sable said finally. Ever since that day you returned late from your meeting with the Seer, something about you has been different, softer, more thoughtful. Sometimes I catch you looking at me as though you are seeing me for the very first time, rather than a woman you have known for years. Elira's heart pounded painfully. She had feared this moment for weeks, and now it had finally arrived with nowhere left to hide. Perhaps recent events have simply changed my perspective, she offered carefully, echoing the same vague explanation she had given Garrick previously. That is not an answer, Sable said, her voice firm but not unkind. I am not accusing you of anything dishonest, Roran. I only wish to understand what has happened to you. We are meant to marry soon, and I feel as though I am standing beside a stranger, wearing a familiar face. The words struck Elira harder than she expected, precisely because they carried an unintended truth neither of them could have anticipated. She was, quite literally, a stranger, wearing a familiar face, and the guilt of deceiving this woman, even unintentionally, weighed heavily on her conscience. Sable, Elira said slowly, choosing her words with extreme care. I have been forced to confront difficult truths about leadership recently, about what it truly means to bear responsibility for so many lives. It has changed how I see many things, including, perhaps, how I have treated the people closest to me. Sable's expression softened slightly, though suspicion still lingered behind her eyes. Is that truly all this is? A shift in perspective, nothing more? Elira hesitated, painfully aware that anything she said now could either preserve their fragile secret or shatter it entirely. I cannot fully explain everything happening within me right now, she admitted honestly, though careful to keep her words vague enough to avoid outright confession. But please believe that whatever changes you have noticed, they do not reflect any dishonesty toward you or our arrangement. Sable studied her carefully for what felt like an eternity, and Elira held her breath, uncertain which way this crucial moment might tip. Finally, Sable nodded slowly, though her expression remained thoughtful rather than fully convinced. I will trust you for now, Sable said quietly. But Roran, if something is truly troubling you, know that you can confide in me. Whatever burden you carry, you need not bear it entirely alone. The genuine warmth behind Sable's offer struck Alira unexpectedly, revealing a depth of care she had never fully considered existed between Roran and his betrothed. Perhaps their relationship carried more real affection than Alira had initially assumed, which only deepened her guilt over the deception she was forced to maintain. Thank you, Alira said softly. That means more than you realize. After Sable finally departed, Alira allowed herself a long, shaky breath, grateful to have survived this encounter, though deeply unsettled by how close they had come to disaster. She made her way immediately toward the healer's hut, needing to share this development with Roran. She found him treating a minor cut on a young warrior's hand, his movements now noticeably more confident than during his first clumsy days in this unfamiliar role. Once the warrior departed, satisfied with his treatment, Alira relayed the tense conversation with Sable in careful detail. Roran listened with growing concern, his borrowed features tightening with worry. She suspects something, he said once Alira finished. Perhaps not the full truth, but enough to notice real changes. I nearly revealed everything, Alira admitted. The way she spoke about caring for you, about wanting you to confide in her, it made the deception feel unbearably cruel. Roran was quiet for a long moment, something complicated passing behind his eyes. Sable and I have always maintained a respectful arrangement, he said slowly, but I confess, hearing you describe her genuine concern surprises me. Perhaps I have never given her the credit she deserves. Alira studied him carefully, noticing an unexpected flicker of something like jealousy stirring within her own chest at the thought of Roran developing deeper feelings toward his betrothed, an emotion that confused and unsettled her, considering their entire relationship existed purely out of desperate necessity. We should discuss how to handle her suspicions moving forward, Alira said, deliberately steering her thoughts away from that uncomfortable realization. If she continues probing, we risk exposing everything before the full moon returns. Roran nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps I, meaning you, should spend a little more time with her, enough to reassure her without revealing anything dangerous. If we withdraw entirely, her suspicions will only grow stronger. Alira grimaced at the prospect, though she recognized the wisdom in his suggestion. I suppose you are right, she said reluctantly. Though I confess, playing the role of your devoted betrothed is proving far more difficult than playing the role of your council authority. Roran offered a faint, tired smile. For what it is worth, from everything Sable and others have said, you seem to be managing both roles remarkably well. Alira felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest at his quiet praise, though she quickly reminded herself that whatever strange feelings were developing between them needed to remain carefully contained until this entire ordeal finally reached its resolution. The full moon was still weeks away, and countless dangers remained ahead of them, including threats neither of them could yet fully anticipate, gathering quietly just beyond the borders of everything they were fighting so desperately to protect. Late one evening, nearly 3 weeks into their strange exchange, Roran found himself sitting quietly beside Alira on the wooden steps outside the healer's hut, both of them watching stars scatter slowly across the darkening sky. The urgency of their daily deceptions had settled into something more manageable, though never entirely comfortable, and these quiet evening moments had become a small refuge they both looked forward to. Do you remember? Roran said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. The first patient I nearly harmed with the wrong herbs? Fenn's wound? Alira laughed softly, the sound carrying genuine warmth, despite emerging from Roran's deep, borrowed voice. I remember feeling terrified you might poison half the pack before I finished teaching you everything. I have grown quite fond of this strange work, Roran admitted, his tone turning more reflective. There is something deeply satisfying about healing someone with your own hands, watching pain ease because of something you did. It is different from commanding warriors or settling disputes, more immediate somehow, more personal. Alira turned to study him carefully, noticing genuine sincerity behind his words. You have grown remarkably skilled, she said honestly. I never expected you to master so much in such little time. I had an excellent teacher, Roran replied, meeting her borrowed gaze directly. Something shifted in the air between them, a charged silence neither quite knew how to break. Elira felt her heart, Roran's heart technically, pounding rapidly beneath her borrowed ribs, and she wondered whether this feeling belonged to her own emotions, or lingered somehow from Roran's body itself. "I have been thinking," Elira said slowly, choosing her words with care, "about how differently I see you now. Before all this happened, you were simply the Alpha King, distant and commanding, someone I rarely spoke with beyond formal pack business. Now I have seen you struggle, and grow, and genuinely care about people you once might have overlooked." Roran nodded thoughtfully. "And I have seen you command a council hall with more wisdom than I sometimes managed myself. I always assumed leadership required strength and decisiveness above all else. You have shown me it requires patience and genuine understanding just as much, perhaps even more." They sat together quietly for a moment, the weight of mutual understanding settling comfortably between them. Then Roran spoke again, his voice softer than before. "Elira, whatever happens when the full moon returns, whatever changes once we return to our rightful bodies, I do not wish for this newfound understanding between us to simply disappear." Elira's breath caught slightly at his words. "Nor do I," she admitted quietly. "Though I confess, I am uncertain what exactly this understanding has become." Roran reached over hesitantly, his borrowed hand, her actual hand, covering hers gently where it rested on the wooden step between them. "Perhaps we do not need to define it precisely tonight," he said. "Perhaps it is enough to simply acknowledge that something meaningful has grown between us through all of this chaos." Elira felt warmth spreading through her chest, an emotion far more complicated than simple gratitude or professional respect. She turned her hand slightly beneath his, allowing their fingers to intertwine gently. "I would like that," she whispered. They remained there together for a long while, watching stars continue their slow journey across the night sky, both quietly aware that whatever bond had formed between them through this impossible situation was becoming something neither of them had expected, nor were entirely prepared to navigate once their true bodies were eventually restored. The following morning, however, brought a stark reminder that their fragile peace remained constantly under threat. A breathless scout arrived at the main hall just as the council meeting began, his expression grim with urgency. "Alpha," he gasped. "Cade Ashgrove has requested a formal audience. He claims to have information regarding, his words exactly, unusual happenings within Blackthorn territory." Elira's stomach dropped immediately, dread flooding through her borrowed body. She exchanged a quick, panicked glance with Garrick, who appeared equally troubled by this unexpected development. "Did he specify what information he possesses?" Elira asked, forcing calm into her voice despite the terror gripping her chest. "He did not elaborate," the scout replied, "only that he wishes to discuss it directly with you, Alpha, and only with you present." Elira's mind raced through countless terrifying possibilities. Had Cade somehow learned about the swap? Had one of his spies witnessed something suspicious during her clumsy early days navigating council responsibilities? Whatever information Cade claimed to possess, it threatened everything they had worked so desperately to protect. "Arrange the audience," Elira said finally, though her borrowed voice trembled slightly despite her best efforts to maintain composure. "I will meet with him personally, tomorrow morning, within our own territory, where our warriors can maintain proper security." As the scout departed to relay this message, Garrick turned toward Elira with obvious concern. "Alpha, forgive my bluntness, but you seem unusually troubled by this request. Is there something I should know before this meeting occurs?" Elira forced a steady expression onto her face, though inwardly panic continued building rapidly. "I simply do not trust Cade Ashgrove's motives," she said, which was entirely true, even if it avoided the deeper fear currently consuming her thoughts. "Whatever information he claims to possess, I suspect it serves his own ambitions, rather than genuine concern for peace between our packs." Garrick nodded slowly, though his expression remained thoughtfully cautious. "Then we shall prepare accordingly," he said. "I will ensure additional warriors remain nearby during tomorrow's meeting, discreetly positioned, in case Cade's intentions prove less than honorable." Once Garrick departed, Elira rushed immediately toward the healer's hut, finding Roran treating a minor injury among the training warriors. She waited impatiently until he finished, then pulled him aside urgently, relaying the alarming news about Cade's request. Roran's expression grew increasingly troubled as she spoke. "This could be exactly what we feared," he said grimly. "If Cade has somehow learned about the swap, he will use it mercilessly against us. especially with the coronation drawing so close. What do we do? Elira asked, her borrowed voice tight with genuine fear. Roran considered the question carefully, his expression hardening with quiet determination. We face him directly, he said finally. Whatever he claims to know, we cannot allow fear to control our response. We prepare carefully, and we handle whatever challenge he presents, with the same courage we have shown throughout everything else these past few weeks. Elira nodded slowly, drawing strength from his steady resolve despite the uncertainty still gripping her thoughts. Whatever tomorrow's meeting revealed, she realized, they would face it together, just as they had faced every other impossible challenge since that fateful night beside the Seer's fire, though neither of them could yet imagine just how dramatically that upcoming confrontation would change everything once again. The meeting hall stood unusually quiet the following morning as Cade Ashgrove arrived, flanked by 4 of his most trusted warriors, their expressions carrying the confident arrogance of a man who believed he already held the advantage. Elira stood at the head of the council table, forcing steady composure into Roran's borrowed frame despite the anxiety twisting tightly within her chest. Cade, Elira said evenly, gesturing toward the seat prepared across from her. You requested this audience claiming unusual happenings within my territory. I am listening. Cade settled into his chair with deliberate slowness, clearly enjoying the tension he had created. He was a broad, imposing man, with cold, calculating eyes that studied Elira carefully before he finally spoke. My scouts have reported something curious, he said. Your behavior these past weeks, Roran, has struck many observers as remarkably inconsistent. Softer decisions, unusual hesitation before council matters. Some might even say uncharacteristic. Elira's heart pounded painfully, though she maintained careful control over her borrowed expression. Careful consideration is not weakness, Cade, she replied calmly. Perhaps you mistake wisdom for hesitation, because you yourself have never practiced patience in your own leadership. A flicker of irritation crossed Cade's features before he composed himself again. Perhaps, he said smoothly. Or perhaps something else entirely explains this change. My scouts also mention a curious visit you made recently, to an old Seer's clearing, deep within the forest bordering our territories. Elira's stomach dropped, though she forced herself to remain outwardly calm. Garrick, seated nearby, glanced sharply toward her, clearly noticing this unexpected revelation for the first time. I consult various advisors regarding matters affecting my pack's future, Elira said carefully, choosing her words with extreme precision. That is hardly unusual behavior for any alpha, preparing for coronation. Cade smiled thinly, clearly unconvinced but lacking concrete proof to press the matter further. Of course, he said, I simply thought it worth mentioning, given how dramatically your behavior has shifted since that particular evening. The tension in the room stretched taut, everyone present sensing the dangerous undercurrent flowing beneath this seemingly casual conversation. Elira realized, with mounting dread, that Cade suspected something significant, even if he lacked definitive evidence to confirm his suspicions. If you have genuine concerns regarding Blackthorn's leadership, Elira said firmly, deciding boldness offered better protection than continued evasion, I suggest you raise them directly, rather than through implications and rumors gathered from careless scouts. Cade's expression hardened slightly at her direct challenge. Very well, he said. I propose a formal demonstration then, before your coronation. A test of strength between us, witnessed by both our packs, to settle any lingering doubts about Blackthorn's continued fitness to claim the title of High King. Elira's blood ran cold. A physical test of strength would immediately expose everything, revealing her borrowed body's complete lack of an alpha's true physical power and instinctive combat training. She glanced quickly toward Garrick, whose expression had grown deeply troubled by this dangerous proposal. Such a demonstration is unnecessary, Elira said, striving to maintain calm despite panic, building rapidly within her chest. My leadership speaks through the decisions I have made, not through unnecessary displays of aggression between allied packs. Allied, Cade repeated, his tone carrying obvious skepticism. Perhaps. Or perhaps you simply fear what such a demonstration might reveal. The room fell into tense silence, every eye now fixed on Elira, waiting for her response. She realized, with mounting horror, that refusing outright would only deepen suspicion, yet accepting risked immediate and catastrophic exposure of the truth they had worked so desperately to protect. I will consider your proposal, Elira said finally. buying precious time, and provide my formal response within 3 days. Cade studied her a moment longer, clearly unsatisfied, but recognizing he could not reasonably push further, without appearing openly hostile before witnesses. 3 days then, he agreed, rising from his seat. I look forward to your decision, Alpha. After Cade and his warriors departed, the council hall erupted into hushed, anxious conversation. Garrick immediately approached Alira, his expression grave. Alpha, we cannot allow this demonstration to proceed. Cade seeks nothing but an excuse to publicly humiliate you, perhaps even provoke outright conflict before your coronation. Alira nodded, though her mind raced desperately, searching for any solution to this impossible dilemma. I understand, she said. Leave this matter with me for now. I need time to consider our options carefully. Once alone, Alira rushed immediately toward the healer's hut, finding Roran anxiously awaiting news of the meeting's outcome. She relayed everything Cade had proposed, watching Roran's borrowed expression grow increasingly alarmed as she spoke. A physical demonstration, Roran repeated, horror evident in his tone. That would expose everything immediately. You cannot possibly match an Alpha's combat abilities within my body's current, unfamiliar limitations. I know, Alira said, panic finally breaking through her carefully maintained composure. But refusing outright risks equal suspicion. Cade already suspects something significant has changed. If we refuse this challenge entirely, he will only grow more convinced something is deeply wrong. Roran paced anxiously across the small hut, his mind working rapidly through potential solutions. Perhaps, he said finally, there is another way. What if I train you, quickly, intensively, over these next 3 days, not to master true combat skill entirely, but enough to demonstrate competent ability without obvious weakness? Alira considered this desperate proposal carefully. 3 days is barely enough time to learn basic movements, she said uncertainly, let alone convince an experienced warrior like Cade that nothing unusual has changed. It is the only option available to us, Roran said firmly, unless the Seer can offer some alternative solution before then. They agreed immediately to seek out Yarrow, hoping desperately that her continued research into ancient texts might have uncovered some faster method of reversal, or at least some clever solution to their current predicament. Unfortunately, when they finally located the old Seer, within her secluded forest dwelling later that evening, her expression carried little encouragement. I have found nothing that would allow reversal before the appointed full moon, Yarrow admitted regretfully. The magic binding you together requires precisely the same celestial conditions that created the swap initially. Attempting reversal prematurely could prove catastrophic, potentially trapping you both permanently within these borrowed bodies. Roran and Alira exchanged worried glances, realizing they would need to face Cade's dangerous challenge using nothing but Roran's rushed and desperate training, hoping against hope it would prove sufficient to maintain their fragile disguise for just a little while longer, until the full moon finally returned and restored everything back to where it truly belonged. Then we train, Roran said with grim determination, turning back toward Alira. Starting tonight, we have very little time, and even less room for error. Alira nodded, steeling herself for the grueling days ahead, silently praying that whatever skills Roran managed to teach her within this impossibly short window would prove enough to protect the fragile secret upon which both of their futures, and perhaps the safety of the entire Blackthorn pack, now precariously depended. For the following 3 days, Roran pushed Alira through exhausting training sessions, deep within a hidden clearing, away from prying eyes, teaching her basic footwork, defensive stances, and simple techniques, designed to redirect an opponent's strength, rather than rely on raw power she simply did not yet possess, within this unfamiliar body. Alira's muscles ached constantly, her borrowed frame unaccustomed to such physical demands, but she pushed through relentlessly, understanding exactly how much depended on her improvement. Meanwhile, Roran spent every spare moment continuing his own education within the healer's hut, determined to ensure that whatever happened during the demonstration, the pack would remain properly cared for, regardless of the outcome. He had grown remarkably capable over these past weeks, handling increasingly complex injuries with growing confidence, though he never stopped marveling privately at how much genuine skill Alira's quiet profession truly demanded. On the morning of the 3rd day, the entire Blackthorn pack gathered within a large open field just beyond the main hall, alongside Cade Ashgrove's assembled warriors, all present to witness the promised demonstration of strength. Alira stood at one end of the field, her borrowed heart pounding furiously beneath layers of forced composure, while Cade waited confidently at the opposite end, clearly relishing this opportunity to expose whatever weakness he suspected lurked beneath Blackthorn's current leadership. Roran watched anxiously from the sidelines, disguised among the gathered healers, his stomach twisted with worry, despite everything they had accomplished together over these desperate 3 days of training. He caught Alira's gaze briefly across the field, offering the smallest reassuring nod he could manage, without drawing unwanted attention. "Let us begin," Cade announced loudly, striding confidently toward the center of the field, where a simple combat demonstration had been arranged. Nothing lethal, merely enough contact to reveal genuine skill, or expose troubling weakness before the assembled crowd. Alira moved forward, drawing deeply on everything Roran had taught her, focusing entirely on defensive positioning and careful timing, rather than attempting to match Cade's obvious physical advantages directly. When Cade lunged forward, testing her reaction, Alira sidestepped smoothly, using his own momentum against him, exactly as Roran had drilled into her repeatedly over their exhausting training sessions. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Cade stumbled slightly, clearly surprised by this unexpected show of tactical skill. He recovered quickly, launching a more aggressive series of attacks, but Alira continued relying on careful footwork and defensive redirection, rather than attempting risky offensive maneuvers she knew she could not yet reliably execute. The exchange continued for several tense minutes, Alira successfully avoiding several powerful strikes, while occasionally landing careful counters that, while not overwhelming, demonstrated clearly competent technique, rather than the obvious weakness Cade had clearly hoped to expose. Sweat poured down her borrowed brow, every muscle screaming with exhaustion, but she pushed through, drawing on reserves of determination she never realized she possessed. Finally, as both combatants grew visibly tired, Garrick stepped forward, raising his hand to formally conclude the demonstration. "I believe sufficient skill has been clearly displayed," he announced firmly, his tone carrying obvious authority that discouraged further argument. "Blackthorn's leadership remains more than capable." Cade straightened, clearly frustrated by the outcome, though unable to reasonably dispute what the assembled crowd had just witnessed with their own eyes. "Impressive," he admitted grudgingly, though suspicion still lingered visibly behind his cold, calculating eyes. "Perhaps I was mistaken in my earlier concerns." As Cade and his warriors finally departed the field, tension slowly easing throughout the assembled crowd, Alira allowed herself a shaky breath of profound relief. She had survived, though barely, and she knew without doubt that she could not have managed such a feat without Roran's dedicated teaching over these past desperate days. However, their relief proved dangerously short-lived. That very same evening, as the pack settled into what should have been peaceful rest, a warning horn suddenly pierced the quiet darkness, its urgent call echoing across the entire territory. Warriors scrambled from their quarters, confusion and alarm spreading rapidly as reports flooded in from the eastern border. "Alpha," a breathless scout reported, rushing directly toward Alira. "Ashgrove warriors are moving against our eastern outpost. Cade has broken his earlier restraint entirely. This is no longer mere posturing." Alira's heart plummeted as she realized their worst fears had finally materialized. Cade, humiliated by the demonstration's outcome, had apparently decided direct confrontation offered better prospects than continued suspicion and diplomatic maneuvering. "Rally every available warrior," she commanded immediately, her borrowed voice carrying newfound authority forged through weeks of difficult practice. "We defend our border, but we do not retreat." As warriors scrambled to organize themselves rapidly, Roran rushed toward Alira, his expression carrying deep concern. "This is exactly what we feared," he said urgently. "You cannot lead warriors into direct conflict. Your body's limitations within actual combat could prove fatal, and if you fall while wearing my form, the swap becomes permanent, or worse." Alira met his gaze steadily, drawing strength from newfound resolve. "The pack needs their alpha now, more than ever," she said firmly. "I will lead from position, coordinating our defense strategically, rather than engaging directly in combat myself. Garrick and our warriors will handle the actual fighting." Roran nodded reluctantly, recognizing the wisdom in her plan despite his continued worry. "Then I will prepare the healer's hut for incoming wounded," he said. "Whatever happens tonight, our warriors will need proper care when this conflict finally ends." They parted quickly, each rushing toward their respective responsibilities, as chaos erupted along the eastern border. Elira positioned herself carefully near the rear of the assembled defense, coordinating troop movements based on everything she had absorbed from Garrick and other council members over these past challenging weeks, directing reinforcements toward vulnerable points, while keeping herself carefully protected from direct combat engagement. Meanwhile, Roran worked tirelessly within the healer's hut, treating a steady stream of injured warriors as they were carried back from the escalating conflict along the border. His hands moved with confident precision now, cleaning wounds, setting broken bones, and administering pain relief with a skill that would have seemed impossible mere weeks earlier. The battle raged for nearly 2 hours before Ashgrove's forces finally began retreating, their initial assault repelled by Blackthorn's disciplined defense and Elira's careful strategic coordination. As the fighting finally subsided, Elira made her way exhausted toward the healer's hut, finding Roran still tending to the last of the wounded, his borrowed frame equally drained from the knight's relentless demands. "We held the border," Elira reported wearily, sinking down onto a nearby stool. "Ashgrove's forces retreated once they realized we would not yield easily." Roran looked up from bandaging a warrior's leg, relief evident across his exhausted features. "You did remarkably well tonight," he said sincerely. "Both of us did, considering everything we have endured these past weeks." As the last wounded warrior finally departed, properly treated and resting comfortably, Roran and Elira sat together quietly, amid the healer's hut's familiar clutter, both physically and emotionally drained from the night's harrowing events. "We are fortunate," Elira said softly, "that neither of us suffered serious injury tonight. Had either of us fallen, everything would have been lost permanently." Roran nodded gravely, reaching over to take her borrowed hand gently within his own. "We have grown far stronger than either of us ever expected, through everything this ordeal has forced upon us," he said quietly. "Whatever happens when the full moon finally returns, I believe we have already proven something remarkable about ourselves, and about each other." Elira squeezed his hand gently in return, comforted by his steady presence despite the exhausting chaos of the evening. "The full moon returns in just 2 more nights," she said quietly. "Whatever tomorrow brings, we are closer now than ever before to finally reclaiming our rightful bodies." They sat together in exhausted silence, both quietly grateful to have survived this latest terrifying trial, while simultaneously aware that the most significant moment of their entire ordeal still awaited them, drawing steadily closer with each passing hour, until the full moon would finally rise again. 2 nights later, beneath a sky glowing silver with the return of the full moon, Roran and Elira made their way back toward the same forest clearing where their strange ordeal had first begun. The old seer Yarrow awaited them there, her ancient bone staff already positioned carefully beside a freshly kindled fire, its flames dancing gently, despite the cool night air surrounding them. "The stars aligned tonight, exactly as they did before," Yarrow said, studying the night sky carefully. "This is our opportunity to correct what went wrong those many weeks ago." Elira felt a strange mixture of relief and unexpected sadness settling over her borrowed frame as she approached the fire. Despite every terrifying challenge they had faced together, she found herself surprisingly reluctant to release this strange chapter of her life, and everything it had taught her about courage, leadership, and her own hidden strength. Roran seemed to sense her conflicted emotions, reaching over to take her hand gently one final time before the ritual began. "Whatever happens once we return to our rightful bodies," he said quietly, "I do not wish for the connection we have built together to simply fade away." "Nor do I," Elira admitted softly, meeting his borrowed gaze with genuine warmth. "These past weeks have changed me in ways I never expected. I have discovered strength I never knew I possessed, and I have discovered something else as well, something I believe you have discovered too." Roran's expression softened with quiet affection. "Then we shall face whatever comes next together," he said firmly, "regardless of which body either of us wears." Yarrow cleared her throat gently, drawing their attention back toward the ritual awaiting them. "It is time," she said. "Please, take your positions exactly as you did before." They stepped forward together, standing across from each other beside the crackling fire, just as they had done weeks earlier, before everything had changed so dramatically. Yarrow raised her bone staff carefully, beginning the same ancient chant, though this time speaking each word with deliberate precision, correcting whatever error had caused the initial catastrophic mistake. The fire suddenly surged upward, blazing brilliantly against the dark night sky, and a familiar wave of blinding white light exploded outward from its flames, engulfing the entire clearing, exactly as it had done before. Elira felt a strange pulling sensation deep within her chest, as though her very soul was being gently drawn backward toward its rightful place. When the light finally faded, Elira opened her eyes and found herself staring down at her own familiar hands, smaller and more delicate than the borrowed frame she had grown accustomed to these past weeks. She looked up quickly, finding Roran standing across from her, once again occupying his own tall, powerful frame, his golden eyes studying her with evident relief, and something warmer besides. "It worked," Roran said, his own genuine voice, deep and commanding, filling the clearing once more. He took a careful step forward, testing his familiar body's balance and strength, clearly relieved to feel everything functioning exactly as it always had before this entire ordeal began. Elira laughed softly, overwhelmed with relief, as she flexed her own familiar fingers, feeling her true body's lighter, more delicate strength returning naturally beneath her command. "We are ourselves again," she said, tears of relief gathering unexpectedly in her eyes. Yarrow watched them both with quiet satisfaction, gathering her staff carefully. "The magic has been properly corrected," she confirmed. "You are both restored fully and permanently to your rightful bodies." Roran approached Elira slowly, studying her familiar face with newfound tenderness. "These past weeks have shown me things about myself, and about you, that I never expected to discover," he said quietly. "You have shown remarkable strength, wisdom, and courage throughout this entire ordeal, qualities I confess I never properly recognized in you before." Elira felt her heart racing, this time entirely her own heartbeat, rather than borrowed sensation. "And you have shown me the genuine burdens leadership demands," she replied softly, along with a compassion I never expected from someone bearing the title of Alpha King. Roran reached out gently, taking her hand within his own once more, this time both of them fully restored to their rightful selves. "Elira," he said seriously, "I do not wish to simply return to how things were before this happened, with you working quietly in the shadows, while I remain distant and unaware of everything you contribute to this pack. You deserve far greater recognition than you have ever received." "What are you suggesting?" Elira asked, though something hopeful already stirred within her chest. "I wish for you to stand beside me," Roran said firmly, "not merely as our pack's healer, though that role remains vitally important, but as someone whose wisdom and strength I have come to genuinely value and admire. I wish for you to become my chosen mate, Elira, if you would have me." Elira's breath caught entirely, overwhelmed by the sincerity behind his unexpected proposal. "What about Lady Sable?" she asked carefully, remembering the genuine warmth she had witnessed during that tense conversation weeks earlier. Roran's expression grew thoughtful. "I have already spoken with Sable honestly about my changing feelings," he admitted. She confessed she had long sensed our arranged engagement lacked the deeper connection she truly desired for herself. "We have agreed, mutually and amicably, to release each other from our previous arrangement, allowing both of us to pursue genuine happiness elsewhere." Relief and joy flooded through Elira simultaneously, hearing that no one's feelings had been carelessly disregarded through this unexpected turn of events. "Then yes," she said softly, meeting Roran's hopeful gaze directly. "I would be honored to stand beside you, Roran, not from necessity or desperate circumstance, but because I have genuinely come to care for you deeply, through everything we have endured together." Roran's face broke into a genuine smile, warmth radiating from his golden eyes, as he gently pulled her closer. "Then let us return home together," he said softly, not as an Alpha King and his overlooked healer, but as two people who have discovered something truly meaningful through the strangest possible circumstances imaginable. They walked back together through the quiet forest, moonlight filtering gently through the trees above them, both fully restored to their rightful bodies, yet forever changed by everything they had experienced and learned throughout this remarkable journey. 3 weeks later, beneath a sky bright with clear morning sunlight, Roran's coronation finally proceeded exactly as originally planned, though with one significant difference nobody had anticipated weeks earlier. As he knelt before the assembled council to receive his formal crown as High King, Elira stood proudly beside him, no longer hidden quietly among the crowd, but recognized publicly as his chosen mate and equal partner in leadership. Garrick, watching proudly from among the assembled council members, could not help smiling at the remarkable transformation he had witnessed unfold over these past several weeks, understanding now, perhaps more clearly than most, just how much genuine growth both their alpha and their beloved healer had undergone together. As Roran rose finally, crown resting firmly upon his head, he turned immediately toward Alira, taking her hand gently within his own, before the entire assembled pack. "This pack's true strength," he announced firmly, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd, "has never rested solely upon warriors and battles alone. It rests equally upon quiet wisdom, patient healing, and genuine compassion, qualities embodied perfectly by the woman standing beside me today." The crowd erupted into enthusiastic cheers, celebrating not only their newly crowned High King, but also the remarkable healer who had quietly earned genuine recognition and love through circumstances none of them could have possibly imagined. Elira smiled brightly, finally stepping fully into the light, after years spent quietly working within the shadows, her heart full with genuine happiness she never once expected to find. As the celebration continued joyously around them, Roran leaned close, whispering softly against her ear. "Whatever challenges lie ahead of us," he murmured, "I know now we shall face them exactly as we learned to during these past unforgettable weeks, together, with courage, patience, and genuine understanding." Elira nodded, her heart overflowing with quiet happiness as she gazed out across the celebrating crowd, finally standing exactly where she belonged, beside the man she had grown to love through the strangest, most terrifying, yet ultimately most meaningful experience either of them had ever shared.